Alright, hello everybody. Today I'm going to take some time to talk about my experiences reloading the 44 Russian cartridge with black powder and a little bit of smokeless, but mostly it's going to be focusing on black powder. For those of you that are asking about the 44 Russian and maybe don't know what it is, the 44 Russian was a request from the Russian government to Smith & Wesson about 1871. They wanted to adopt the Smith & Wesson number 3 American revolver, which shot a 44 caliber heeled bullet that was outside lubricated. They didn't particularly want the heeled outside lubricated bullet, so they requested a 44 caliber inside lubricated cartridge in that revolver. And Smith & Wesson obliged because it was a big contract and it was going to give them a lot of money. So they developed the 44 caliber round that was inside lubricated, and it became called the 44 Russian. And then the cartridge they had in the number 3 became the American, the 43 American and the 43 Russian, or 44 Russian. Get some perspective on the 44 Russian size. These are all 44 Russian cartridges in front. I'm going to move these out of the way for a second, and to put things into perspective, there's your 44 Russian cartridge. It came out around 1871, and then 1908-ish. It turned Smith & Wesson came out with the 44 Special cartridge, which was a lengthened 44 Russian case. They had the same ballistics as the 44 Russian. There's a story behind that. But ballistically they were identical. But the 44 Special would not chamber in 44 Russian revolvers. Most of them were top breaks. And anyway, we'll maybe talk about that at a later time. 44 Special eventually turned into the 44 Magnum, which came out in 1955. So there's your genesis of the 44s right there. The 44 Russian, the Special in the middle, and then the Magnum on the right. The 44 Russian basically started everybody towards inside lubricated bullets. From then on, most of the revolvers in the early 1870s were heeled bullets. The conversion revolvers, the Henry rifles, the Winchester 66, they were all outside lubricated heeled bullets. And then after the 44 Russian cartridge came out, things started moving over towards that direction with inside lubricated. Hence the 45 Long Colt was inside lubricated. The 50-70 preceded the 44 Russian, but for all intents and purposes, the 44 Russian pretty much brought it into the light and started people designing bullets that way. But anyway, we'll move on. So my first revolver that I started shooting 44 Russian through was a Cimarron open top that was chambered in 44 Special, but I like the idea of shooting authentic cartridges from the time period the guns were manufactured. Even though that open top didn't come in 44 Russian, it was the closest I was going to get. So I bought a 44 caliber mold. It was an old mold. It was an old Ideal mold that it was handles and mold were all one unit. You could not take the mold blocks off the handle, so it's a pretty early mold. It was the 429-251, and that's what this bullet is. It's the Ideal 429-251. Cast out of close to pure lead as I could get it. I think it ended up, I didn't weigh them before I started the video, but I believe it ended up around 255, 256 grains with my castings alloy. And my quest was to duplicate the load. This was the closest I could come at the time with my knowledge of what bullets were used. I learned more later on about this bullet, at least what I think is to be true, that changed my mind about using it. But anyway, with modern Starline cases and this bullet seated to the crimp groove, which is the top groove on this bullet, you cannot get 23 grains, which is the published amount of black powder, into a Starline case. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, that the new cases are solid head and they don't hold as much powder. At any rate, compression with black powder is fully acceptable, so I thought, what the heck? We'll compress it until I can get it to seat all the way. And I did, and it was compressed pretty good. And I shot them, and they fired. I remember somebody at the range saying, "Oh, I can see your bullets coming out of the flying down the range." And I'm like, well, I know they're slow, but they're not that slow. And I got my chronograph out, and they were running in the upper 400s and upper and lower 500 feet per second. And I knew that wasn't right. So I got to thinking, and I'm like, I'm wondering if I compressed it too much and it's slowing down the ignition of the powder. I know I had never read anything about like that whatsoever, but I thought, you know what, I'm going to try loading a smaller amount into the case. And I ran, I think it was half grain increments from like 17 up to like 21-ish, like 5 rounds of each weight. And I chronographed them, and amazingly enough to me anyway, I noticed that, and I can't remember the exact figures, but obviously the 17 grain load was pretty slow, but they kept getting faster as I went up until I hit around 19.5 to 20, and then the velocity started dropping drastically, I guess from all the compression I needed to get that bullet in there. So what I did at the time was I knew that 23 grains was the amount that they said was in there. So I'm like, well, I wonder, it obviously is the brass. It can't be the bullet. It's got to be the brass. If I can fit more powder in that case with a button head, a primer button head case. So I got on eBay or Gunbroker, I don't remember, and I found some old Peters brass and a little bit of Remington that was button head on the inside. And I don't know, I've got a case that I can try to demonstrate what button head is, but we've got a lot of people call them balloon head. I don't think that's the correct terminology. I think a balloon head case is an older case even yet from this, that it was designed differently than a button head. But I'm going to see if I can show this to you all. Find my flashlight. So solid head case on the inside, it's flat, and it's kind of hard to tell, but that light gets in the way, but you can see it's flat on the bottom with the hole. A button head case, as you can see, it looks like a little button, and there is a depression around the edge. There's some junk down in there where more powder will fit. So these old Peters cases, this is a 44 special case I have here, and it is pretty ancient. This one is a Rayco, Winchester Repeating Arms Company. And I have some, well, that's not the story on there. But anyway, I found some Peters brass, which is what this is. It's got the same internal dimensions as that case I just showed you, the button head. And I was able to get 23 grains in there with that bullet. And I got my over 700 feet per second that I was looking for in that bullet. So I was thrilled. I was like, well, that's the solution to that problem. As far as I replicated the velocities and the weight of the bullet. But then the more I thought about it, I like to shoot these guns, and I only have 50 cases of this Peters brass. I need to do some more research because I can't be shooting all this crap out of this. It's not going to last forever. So I got to researching online about original 44 Russian bullets. And in a thread on some website that I've long forgot, I came up with two other bullets from that era that were used in the 44 Russian. One was the Ideal 429-184, which is this one, and the 429-478, which is also known as the Anderton bullet. And I believe back in the day it had a different number, which was 429-215, but they changed that with a semi-wad cutter, but that just confuses things. But anyway, you will notice that in both of these bullets, the part that is seated into the cartridge is much shallower, because I seat this Anderton bullet to the top of the top lube groove. So when I crimp into the crimp groove, the bullet that I was originally using is seated that much further into the case. And the same thing goes for the 184 bullet. The 184 bullet gets crimped over, and it's hard to see in here, but there is a ridge right here. It gets crimped over this band. So the crimp groove on this is going to be, I mean, that's where you're looking at on that, how much deeper that bullet. So I decided that I was using the wrong bullet. This bullet, this 251 bullet, in my opinion, although it may be listed for the 44 Russian and may have been used in the 44 Russian, probably works great in smokeless loads, but you're probably not getting the full ballistic potential out of the Blackpowder loads. So the Anderton bullet I was able to pick up, believe it or not, pretty relatively easily. I picked up the mold, the Ideal or Lyman molds on eBay. Took me a while to find them, but I did find them. I got a 2-cavity mold, and this was the first one that I cast and started working with the Starline brass, and I was able to get some, the 23 grains in without a problem, crimped up to the top of the upper lube groove. And I was getting out of my 7.5 inch open top, I was getting in the upper 700s, close to 800 feet per second out of this bullet. So that was a success. Although this wasn't the first original 44 Russian bullet, it was later developed by a man by the name of Anderton. He competed in pistol shoots, and this was his bullet design for the 44 Russian, which won some championships. The 44 Russian was an already inherently accurate cartridge, and this particular bullet just made it more accurate. And I will say this bullet does shoot very well out of my revolver. It's probably better than the other ones. The other one, which I think is probably the most authentic and closest to the original bullet, is the Ideal 429-184. 184 or 182. I'll have to look that up. I don't remember exactly. But this one also does not have a lot of the bullet that extends down the case. Easily get my 23 grains of black powder in a Starline case. And out of my open top, I was getting decent accuracy and around 750-ish feet per second, which is right along the published, at the time, numbers of, I believe it was 760-ish somewhere. And it has the profile, which I am most familiar with when I look at old Russian bullets and also early 44 Special bullets. So I haven't loaded these in 44 Special yet, but I intend to and see how they shoot. I'm sure they'll be fine. But anyway, my loads consist of mostly, at least from now on, probably going to be this particular bullet and a little bit of the Anderton bullet, and 23 grains of Go X3F and a Winchester large pistol primer is all I've ever used. And I use the Winchester large pistol primers in my black powder loads because they're a brass color, and I use CCI in my smokeless loads, so I can look at them at a glance and know whether they're the smokeless load or the black powder loads. Trying to think, I've also run, I believe, this bullet, the 251 bullet, with Unique, and it runs, I think it was 4.7 grains in that bullet. It was running around the factory, mid 700 feet per second in the 7.5 inch open top. The Anderton bullet is around 210 grains. The 184 bullet runs about 256, which is right along with a lot of published information back then. And then this one ran about, I think, around 255. 208, 210, that range. 246 and 255. And that's with, I'm not going to say pure lead, but it's pretty darn close. And that's what I mostly cast with black powder. As long as I don't run the velocities up too high, I don't have any issues with that. I use a homemade lube, which is 50% beeswax and probably about 40% Crisco with no salt. That's very important. And I usually throw in a little olive oil in it also. And at least in my pistols and these loads, in my open top and my Richards conversion, I have absolutely no fouling issues, no binding issues whatsoever. They work perfect for, I haven't been able to get enough rounds through them to get them to bind up. And I know I've shot close to 100 rounds through those pistols in one sitting and had no binding whatsoever. They work very well. But anyway, I'm trying to think. I've gone through the different bullet types and the different brass types that I've used to reach my goals. That pretty much covers the Russian 44 Russian black powder. I'm sure you could probably up the velocities if you want, particularly by maybe going to an old Ensford or Swiss powder, but there's really no need to with this round. I mean, the 44 Russian is what it is. It's an obsolete round that, you know, it runs at relatively low velocity by our standards today. The Anderton bullet, like I said, probably showed the promise for the best accuracy. The 184 bullet probably is the most authentic to the late 1800s. And this bullet is the heaviest and didn't show any bad attributes. I just couldn't get the full amount of powder in the Starline cases. So I don't know if I'm going to continue casting this bullet or not. There's nothing wrong with it. It probably works great in the 44 Special, and that might be what I'll use it for. But that's pretty much the gist and what I have to share on my experiences loading the 44 Russian. If you have any questions, comments, corrections, please post them in the comments section, and I'll try to get back with you and hopefully answer any questions you have, or maybe you have something you can educate me on. But have a nice Happy New Year.